in cold case investigations to both the scriptures and to the idea about the existence of God. Is there any really good reason to believe? Look, you're in this room. Are you here because this feels good? Are you here because this is working for you? Or are you here because you were raised here? A lot of you were raised in this church, I know. Is that why you come to church? Is this part of your life, part of your routine? That's not why I go to church. I've got family who would say they go to church that way. They know their experience, and that's all they've ever done is go to church. My question is, okay, that's fine, that's great, but is it true? I mean, is it true in a way that we could demonstrate evidentially? My kids wanted to know that too, by the way. And although a lot of us, my age, we're like, I don't really even care that much to know what the case for Christianity is. I'm already in. I already believe this is true. You got kids sitting next to you? They may be in the same position you're in. Most likely they're not. Most likely they've got deep questions they want answered. And they may stay with you quietly for a season, but at some point they are going to check out. And by the way, when we poll people in college who have left the church and we ask them, when did you first step away? It's almost always between the ages of 12 and 17. Really? They aren't even in college yet. That's right. It turns out they left before they left us. We have a duty, I think, to be able to answer some of these questions. I want to answer them for my kids. I now have a son who is doing the same job that I was doing for years before him. He has the same name I have. We only use one name over and over and over again. So we're like the George Foreman of law enforcement, okay? Do you guys know who George Foreman is? He's a boxer. He had 6 boys, and he named them all. What name are they? George Foreman. So he has my name. He's using the same tools that I used before him, at the same uniform, driving the same kinds of cars. I did the same thing that my dad did before me. He has the same name I have. We have been doing this job with that name on our nameplate for 57 years. So what I want to share with you tonight is an approach that I hope you'll be able to adopt and then start to rethink the way you've been thinking about your faith. I was asked a couple of years ago to do a very short scene in a movie called God's Not Dead 2. Now, I wasn't sure what to expect here, but I knew I was going to have about 6 minutes to make a case for what I believed, for what I knew to be true evidentially. Now, think about that for a second. If someone said to you, okay, I'm going to give you 6 minutes to explain why you think God exists, how many of you think right now you'd be ready to give a quick 6-minute presentation? If so, I want you to come up right now. We'll do it right now. No? It turns out you have to know a lot more than 6 minutes worth of information to go back and get the 6 minutes you want to use. So tonight, I'm going to teach you a process we use at death scenes that I think will help you make the case for God's existence. So in other words, we're going to jump right in to what I call Death Investigations 101. I've been teaching this to investigators as well, but tonight we're going to apply it to the examination of God's existence, okay? It turns out that not every death scene is a crime scene. Did you know that? There are 4 ways to die. Only one of them is criminal. I hope when I get called out in the middle of the night, it's one of the other 3. You know why? Because I'm going home. But if it's a murder, I have to stay. Let me give you an example. Let's start with a dead guy laying in the room. Now, he looks suspiciously like my son, Jimmy, but pay no attention to that. Now, is that a crime? Maybe. What do we have evidentially? So far, we have a dead guy laying face down. That's it. Well, how do we know if that's a crime? Well, we have a process. I'm going to teach it to you. You ready? We make 2 lists. 2 lists that begin with an E. The first E list is a list of evidence in the room. So we'll make that list on one side, okay? And the second list is a list of explanations. Both these lists start with an E. Okay, so far all we have is a dead guy laying face down in the room. Now, how do we explain dead guys that are laying face down in the room? Well, there are 4 ways to explain dead guys. Maybe you can volunteer this. We'll have a little participation here. What are the ways people die? Heart attack. Okay, so that would be like a natural death. Well, yes. Boy, someone's been watching criminal shows. Blunt force trauma. A ligature death. Yes, there's another way you could, if they accidentally fell down or something, and there's a suicide, someone said suicide, we can put that on now these are 3 ways you die that I don't even care about, okay? Because the 4th one is what I care about, and that is the blunt force trauma, which is the homicide. Got it? These are the 4 ways that people die. Now the only question left is, how do we know which of these 4 ways this guy died? Well, we start to look at the evidence on one side, and we compare that evidence to the ways you could explain it, and we say, which of those explanations is the most reasonable in light of the evidence? Now here, I think we can start to cross some things out. So which of these 4 explanations, given what we know so far, do you think it's safe to cross out? Well, okay, if he had a heart attack, a natural death, he would look just like that. If he accidentally took too many pills, he would look like that. If he intentionally took too many pills, he would look like that. If I poisoned him with too many pills, he would look like that. Do you see that right now? Every one of these explanations is not only equally possible. It's equally reasonable. Can't cross out anything. Let's change the scenario, though. What if he's a dead guy laying face down in the room, but now he's in a pool of his own blood? Would that change things? Let's add that to our list. We've got a pool of blood. We'll put that on that list. That's the list of evidences over on that side. Okay, now what can I cross out? Yeah, well, what if he had a brain aneurysm, hits the deck, and he bleeds out through his nose? Happens all the time. If that happened, there would be blood around his head. Because that's where, now I've got blood coming out of center torso. How in the world can someone bleed? Out of what place are they bleeding naturally at the center torso? Do you see the problem here? I think it's reasonable for us to now cross out now. Now, we could easily say, isn't it still possible that it's a natural? Yeah, anything's possible. We're not after possible, we're after reasonable. So we're going to cross out the one that we think is the least. Can I cross out anything else? Can I cross out suicide or not really? I got to roll him over and see what the injury is, right? So let's change the scenario. What if he is a dead guy laying face down in a pool of blood, but now he's got a single gunshot wound in his torso, and that is an exit wound coming out of his back? It changes things. Let's go ahead and put that on our list. Now, what can I cross out? Well, okay, he just doesn't know the gun is loaded. He's handling a loaded gun. He doesn't know it's loaded. He accidentally shoots himself. That's the exit wound. That's still in the, I think that's still in the range. That's got to stay up there. Suicide really has to stay. Everything has to stay up there still. I've added additional evidence, but still I cannot eliminate possible explanations. Let's change it. What if in addition to all of that, we also have on the floor next to the body a suicide note? Yeah, and when we examine the note, it's on a piece of paper that we find elsewhere in the room. It's in his own handwriting. It's only got his skin cell transfer DNA. It's only got his fingerprints on it. Now I'm going to add that piece of evidence to my list. Okay, let's put it on our list. Tell me, what can I cross out? I think I can cross. Now, he may have accidentally killed himself before he intended to kill himself. But it looks like I can cross out accidentally, right? Are you sure now what this is? What do you think it is? You're shaking your head. You don't think it's a suicide, do you, sir? Maybe. Well, okay. How many of you think this is not a suicide? There's a suicide note on the floor. Oh, so it's in his handwriting. So, okay, so you're telling me that somebody forced him to write his own suicide note because you have been watching Criminal Minds. Right? So you think you know how this works? No. Okay, Criminal Minds is stupid, okay? So stop watching that. I have a whole talk on TV stupid, okay? That's not stupid. All right, let's change this scenario slightly. Let's change it slightly. Let's say, okay, back to our scenario. Let's say that we have, in addition to, let's say we examine the suicide note, and it's not on a piece of paper that we can find anywhere else in the room. It's not in his handwriting. It's a stranger's handwriting. A stranger's DNA is on the note. Ooh, that would change things. How about this? What if he didn't have one gunshot wound? He had multiple gunshot wounds. What if those wounds were all entry wounds on his back? Oh, yeah. What if there was bloody footprints leading out of the room? Would that change your mind? Let's go ahead and add those things to our list here. There you go. You can see this is a California murder right here. That's the beach out there. This is the surfing murderer. Okay, so we're going to add these features. Now we have multiple entry wounds on his back. We have foreign fingerprints. We have bloody footprints leading out of the room. And now when I add this to the list, I think we can begin to see, okay, look, now I think we can start to cross out suicide, right? It's kind of hard to shoot yourself multiple times in the back and then walk out of the room in your own blood, okay? So that now we can cross out. This now leaves us with one most reasonable inference from the evidence. This process is called abductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning. It's also called inferring to the most reasonable explanation. Jurors do this all the time. You do this all the time. When your kids come home and they're late and they give you some lame excuse, you start to wonder. I had a partner one time, he used to always tell me that he was a salty old guy who was always a pain in the rear, and he was no fun to work with sometimes, right, because he's always grumpy. And one night he confesses to me that he would stay up late and wait for his son to come home so he can give him a hug and a kiss before he went to bed. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. I know you. I can't even imagine you hugging and kissing your own kids, right? He says, don't be stupid. I just want to get close enough to him so I can smell if he's been smoking dope or drinking. What's he doing? Abductive reasoning. He's collecting his little bits and pieces. Now, we did something else here that I think is helpful when we're talking about the existence of God. And I want you to see it. The other thing we're doing when we work these kinds of death scenes is we're playing a little game I call inside or outside the room. Here's what I mean. If I can explain everything that's in the room by staying in the room, it's not a murder. Did you hear what I said? If I can explain everything that's in the room by staying in the room, it's probably not a murder. Now, I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's just take the room here, and we'll make it a little graphically simpler. Let's say the room is like a box, and he's in the box. Here he is. Now the question is, we're going to play this little game of inside or outside the room. If I can explain everything that's in the room by staying in the room, it's not going to be. Here's what I mean by that. So let's say, for example, I got this note. Well, it's in his handwriting. It's on paper I find elsewhere in the room. He can do that by himself in the room without any help from anyone else. I can now explain the note by staying inside the room. Follow me so far? Also, let's say I talk to somebody and they say, oh yeah, he's owned that gun for years. He loves that gun, and it sure is, it's registered to him, and they tell me that he keeps it in a safe that's in the room. Now I can even explain the gun in the room without anyone else's help. I can stay in the room for an explanation. And anyone can shoot themselves. Oh, I love it when we have people who are signing, because if you talk really fast, I can't keep up with you. And you can talk a lot of big words like ligature and other things like that. What is the sign for ligature, by the way? You have no idea, okay? That is very impressive. That is very impressive. I got to get my speed up a little higher. Okay, so, but here, one single gunshot wound, anyone can shoot themselves once without any help from anyone else outside the room. Agreed? These now are features of the crime scene that I can explain by staying inside the room. Now, if that's the case, it's going to be one of these three. It's obviously not going to be a natural. It's going to be an accidental or a suicide. On the other hand, if I have to go outside the room for the best explanation, everything's going to shift. If, for example, I find out that there's foreign fingerprints on that note, it's not on paper that's native to the room, it's not with a pen, it's going to be foreign DNA, foreign fingerprints, foreign handwriting. I now have to go outside the room to figure out who wrote that note. And if someone tells me, oh yeah, he's afraid of guns, he would never own a gun, and sure enough, it's not registered to him, and there's no skin cell transfer, and there's nothing else biological that ties him to the gun, now I got to go look for whose gun that is. And it's kind of hard to shoot yourself several times in the back without any help from anyone else, right? And finally, I have bloody footprints leading out of the room. Clearly, I'm needing to find a cause for this crime that's outside the room. Now, everything shifts to homicide. Why? Because I now have evidence of an intruder. It's pretty simple. Intruders change everything. Intruders, in fact, are the very thing that turn death scenes into crime scenes. I'm looking for evidence of an intruder. Simple. Also, you might have some sense of curiosity about why somebody would kill themselves or how they could die accidentally. But once you know that you've got an intruder, your sense of curiosity better shift to a sense of urgency, because the one show on TV that gets it is a show called The First 48. Have you ever seen it? Pretty boring show, really. It's just a guy with a camera following around cops in the first 48 hours. Now, look, the first 48 hours is a chance you have to get there before everyone's stories get lined up, before all the evidence gets destroyed. When you wait 30 years, it's a lot harder to solve cases. So we want to work quick. All that being said, when I was a brand new investigator of Christianity, at some point I said to myself, I got a problem with the supernatural miracle stuff that's in the scriptures. I need to know, is there anything supernatural, really? I believe there wasn't. And I was going to look at the universe this way, like a room. Can I explain everything that's in the room by staying in the room? Or is the best explanation outside the room? In other words, there are things in this room of the natural universe, just space-time matter governed by physics and chemistry. There are things in this room that I have to explain. Can I explain all of them by staying inside the room, using nothing more than space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry? If I can explain everything that's in the room by staying in the room, there's no intruder. On the other hand, if I can't, and I have to go outside the natural realm of the universe to get an answer for what's inside the natural realm, well, then I got a problem. And I think there are 8 things in the room that everyone has to explain, regardless of who you are, regardless of what you believe. First, we are in a room that has a beginning. That's right. All space, time, and matter came into existence from nothing. Oh, you mean like space is nothing, right? I mean, it's like a big void. There's nothing there. It's just space. No. Space is not nothing. Space is something. What? Yeah, we're saying, and by the way, this is not just the claim of Scripture in Genesis 1. This is the claim of science in the standard cosmological argument called Big Bang cosmology. All space, time, and matter, according to the science, came into existence at one point in the past from nothing. Well, what is nothing if space is something? I thought space was nothing. You tell me space is something? Yes. Well, it's nothing. It's what Aristotle says nothing is. It's the stuff that rocks dream about. Nothing. Got it? Now, you have to change definitions here in order to change this. But the reality of it is, we got to explain how something could cause everything to come into existence. And whatever this is that causes all space, time, and matter to come into existence, it cannot be spatial, temporal, or material, because those things aren't available to you. Follow me? We're already kind of in a problem situation, don't you think? Not only that, the universe we see is incredibly fine-tuned. All the cosmological constants are incredibly fine-tuned to a razor's edge. The smallest deviation in weak force, the strong nuclear force, electromagnetism, gravity, all of these things are just small variations, and we don't even get a universe that comes into existence and stays in existence. And certainly we do not get a universe that will support life. The fine-tuning of the universe is remarkable. And by the way, it's not even controversial. Even atheists, astrophysicists will admit we've got to explain the fine-tuning of the universe. Not only that, we have life that comes into existence from non-life in this universe. How does that happen? How does inorganic matter turn into living biological organisms? And not only that, when we study those organisms, they show the appearance of design. They appear to be designed. Worse yet, Craig started off the talk tonight talking about, you're thinking about this right now. What are you using to think about it? Using your brain? Do you have a mind? Really? Well, atheists believe in brains. That's stuff that's made up with space, time, matter, acted upon by physics and chemistry, but minds are immaterial. They reject minds. Sam Harris, the neuroscientist who's also a philosopher, has written 2 books on this issue. He rejects the idea that we have minds. He says you have a brain, but not a mind. That's an illusion caused by your brain. So we got to explain consciousness, mind. Worse than this, if we don't have minds that are free to think freely, and we are just brains affected by prior neurons that are firing like dominoes falling against dominoes, that means that your thoughts are not free. Your thoughts are simply the consequence of prior activity in your physical brain, like dominoes. Dominoes are not free to fall. They only fall if fallen against. That means that Sam Harris says you don't have the kind of freedom you think you have because you can't control the prior neuron firing. So he denies free agency also. But we seem to experience mind. We seem to experience free agency. How do we get it with just space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry inside the room? Is there a better explanation outside the room? Finally, we know that we have objective moral truths. Do we get those by staying inside the room? Are those just inventions that we invent as communities or as persons? Or are there objective standards that existed before we even knew what they were? If so, where do they come from? And finally, what is that standard of goodness, of righteousness that we think is the standard by which anything is called evil? I'm not going to go through all this with you tonight, but I want you to see that there are 8 things in the room you have to account for. The only question is, can I explain these things by staying inside the room? Or is the better explanation outside the room? And if it is outside the room, then you and I both know we've got another problem. We've got an intruder problem. Only this intruder spans the entire cosmos. Now, this is why I wrote a book called God's Crime Scene, not because I was suggesting that God had committed a crime. And my publisher was telling me we can't use this title. People are going to be confused. I said, no, trust me, they won't be confused. We'll figure it out. I'm saying you could actually investigate the universe like a crime scene. Make sense? And that's what we're going to do. Now, I will tell you this. I actually teach this class at Biola. It takes 17 hours to go through all 8 pieces of evidence. Now, I'm not going to put you through 17 hours. So if you needed evidence that there is a God, you just got it. Because I'm not going to force you to sit here for 17 hours. Yes, therefore, there is a God. We can go home. Okay, you're ready to go. But what we're going to do is return to our crime scene and say, okay, look, this is how we handle crime scenes. We'll make a list of evidences, a list of explanations. This is how we're going to handle the universe. We'll make a list of evidences. In this case, there's 8. And then we'll make a list of explanations. And in this case, there are 2. We can either stay inside the room, and if that's the case, these are unguided, natural laws that create everything, physics and chemistry acting on space, time, and matter, or we go outside the room for a supernatural, extra-natural being that is the cause of these 8 things. And tonight, to spare you all 8 explanations, we're just going to talk about one. This one, that life somehow emerges in the universe from non-life. How in the world does that happen? How do we go from dirt to living biology? How do we go from just the basic building blocks of life to the fine-tuned, designed organisms that we are? How does that happen? Now, I had a case a number of years ago, and it occurred about 4 days before New Year's Eve. And so I knew as soon as we got the call out, this was going to be terrible because I knew we'd be working this case through the holiday, and I was upset. We get there, and sure enough, the guy is at his workplace. He works at a warehouse. He's been shot in the head. Next to his body is a cell phone. A smartphone that has a text. And I first looked at this text and I thought, man, what is this? Is this like a... Here it is. I thought, I'm not sure I've ever seen a text like that. Is it related to the crime? Is it an accident? The sequence doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Is it a butt dial? Is it an encoded message to the deceased, to the victim? Long story short, it was an encoded message from his wife, Rachel, who wanted to have her husband killed because she had started dating another guy, and this affair had been going on for about a year, and she told her boyfriend that she wanted her husband dead before the end of the year, and now it's 4 days before the end of the year. He's a procrastinator, and he has to get the job done now. So she says, today is the day you're going to do it. He says, okay. He goes over and starts heading over to the husband's place of business. And while he's en route, her husband calls and says, I'm coming home early. It's the holidays. It's dead here. I'm just going to close shop. We're going to come home. That's not good because she has the killer heading over to the business. So she texted him this message. And as I did all phone tolls for all of her phone messages, I wrote warrants for all that stuff, I could see that she had done this many times in the past, only the numbers would be different. This is a message to her husband that says, I will be there in 30 minutes. Sometimes I'll be there in 15 minutes. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He knew what this meant. So rather than just leave, he waited for her to arrive. And that gave the killer time to get there. So it turns out this message is not a butt dial. It's not an accident. The phone didn't do it by some kind of physical property of the phone. Instead, it was an encoded message that she sent, and he understood it because they had this common language, and it froze him in place long enough to die. Make sense? It turns out this is very much the explanation for how life originates in the universe, because you probably are all familiar with this molecule, the biggest molecule known to humans. This is DNA. And in DNA, there are 4 nucleotides that are arranged in a particular sequence. And I wish it was only this short. It goes off in that direction forever. Oh, it seems like forever. Off in this direction 4 miles. And it has more information density than I can possibly explain to you. A small piece is said to have the same kind of density as every bit of data and information on the Facebook platform. Every comment you've ever seen, anyone's ever made. This is an incredibly dense molecule, and these nucleotides are in a specific, this is not random, this is information. This is actually directions for life. Everything about you somehow is represented in this DNA. Why does your nose look that way? Why are your ears like that? Why do you either have attached lobes or deep